I returned home early from Boston, and at the Denver airport, my husband stood there holding my favorite red roses, while another woman ran straight into his arms and kissed him like she'd been waiting her whole life for that moment. That's the sentence that destroyed my marriage. That's the image burned into my brain that I can't unscrub no matter how hard I try. And that's exactly where this nightmare of a story begins. My name is Celeste Harmon, and I need to tell you what happened because keeping this inside is eating me alive. Just a few weeks ago, I was living what I thought was a pretty great life. I had just been promoted to regional manager at a major pharmaceutical company. I had a beautiful home in a nice Denver suburb, and I had Ryan, my husband of 4 years, an architect with the kind of smile that used to make my stomach flip. Everything seemed fine. Better than fine, actually. Or at least that's what I kept telling myself every time that little voice in the back of my head whispered that something felt off. I was in Boston for a medical conference, boring presentations about drug distribution networks and regional sales strategies. My flight back was supposed to land at 8 p.m., but it got delayed by almost 3 hours. Instead of texting Ryan to let him know, I decided to surprise him. I grabbed an Uber and headed straight home, already imagining his face when I walked through the door early. But when I got there, the house was empty, completely dark. His car was gone. That's when that little voice got louder. This is a long story, and it's going to hurt to tell. But I'm going to hear how this all plays out, how a single moment at an airport unraveled everything I thought I knew about my life. Then stick around for what comes. You're not going to believe where this goes. I stood in my dark, empty house and felt my heart start to race in that way that tells you something very wrong. The kind of racing that makes your hands shake and your mouth go dry. I tried calling Ryan. It rang 4 times before he picked up. His voice sounded too casual, like he was forcing it. He told me he was at the office finishing up a project and that he'd be home in a few hours. But there was something in the way he said it. This tiny hesitation before the word office that made my stomach drop. I can't explain how you just know when someone you love is lying. It's like your body recognizes it before your brain wants to accept it. Every instinct I had was screaming that something was off. That's when I remembered the location sharing app we both had on our phones. Ryan had insisted we set it up about a year ago, saying it was for safety, so we'd always know where the other person was in case of an emergency. I'd thought it was sweet at the time. Thoughtful, even. I opened the app with trembling fingers. The little blue dot with Ryan's name popped up on the map. He wasn't at his office. He was at Denver International Airport, my airport, the same airport I had just left 20 minutes ago. My mind immediately started making excuses for him. That's what you do when you love someone, right? You give them the benefit of the doubt even when every red flag is waving in your face. Maybe he was picking up a client. Maybe he had a last-minute business trip. Maybe he was actually coming to surprise me and didn't want to ruin it by answering my call honest. But none of those explanations felt right. None of them explained why he'd lie about being at the office. None of them explained that weird tone in his voice. I didn't even think. I just grabbed my keys and drove back to the airport like a woman possessed. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I kept trying to breathe normally. My chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. Whole drive, I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that there would be a reasonable explanation, that I was about to feel really stupid for doubting him. But deep down, I knew. You always know. When I got to the arrivals area, I parked illegally and practically ran inside. My eyes scanned the crowd frantically until I saw him. There he was, Ryan, husband, standing near the baggage claim exit, holding an enormous bouquet of red roses, the expensive kind from that fancy florist downtown, the kind he only bought for special occasions. For one brief, stupid second, my heart soared. He was there for me. He was planning a surprise welcome home. I'd been wrong. Everything was fine. I started to walk toward him, already planning my apology for doubting him, already feeling embarrassed about my paranoia. Then a woman came running out of the gate area. She was blonde, tan, wearing a tight red dress that probably cost more than my entire work wardrobe, and she was screaming his name, Ryan, with this joy in her voice that made my blood turn to ice. I watched, frozen, unable to breathe, as this strange woman threw herself into my husband's arms. He caught her. He spun her around like they do in those romantic movies. And then he kissed her. Not a friendly, not a polite kiss that told me about who this woman was and what she... I felt like I was watching it happen in slow... The way his hand cupped the back of her head, the way she wrapped her legs partially around him, The way they were both smiling, actually smiling, when they finally pulled apart to look at each other. That smile. That was the worst part. It was the same smile the one I thought belonged to my whole body started shake. Tears were streaming down my face, but I couldn't feel them. I couldn't feel anything except this hollow, crushing weight in my chest where my heart used to be. Some rational part of my brain that was still functioning to document this, to get proof. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold my phone, but I managed to start. I captured everything. The kiss, the way they walked hand in hand toward the parking garage, the way he opened the car door, our car, the one I helped miss. They drove away together, and I just sat there in my car in that parking garage staring at nothing. I don't know how long I stayed there. Could have been 10 minutes, could have been an hour. Time felt meaningless. When I finally found the strength to move, I called my older sister Patricia. She's a family law attorney in Chicago, and she's always been the strong one, the one who knows what to do in a crisis. I could barely get the words out through my sobbing. She didn't waste time with sympathy or questions. She just said one thing that cut through my hysteria like a knife. Don't go home. Don't confront him. Not yet. Come to Chicago. Right now. We need to be smart about this. So I did. I drove straight to the airport, that cursed airport, and bought a ticket on the next flight to Chicago. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't go home. I just left. On that plane, sitting in a middle seat between two strangers, I watched that video over. Each time I hoped I'd see something different. Each time it was exactly the same. My husband kissing another woman. My husband in love with someone who wasn't. And that's when I realized something that would change. I wasn't just heartbroken, furious, and I wasn't going to just roll over and let him destroy. But I also realized something else. Something that made my hands start shaking all over again as the plane took off. Ryan was willing to lie this elaborately. What else had he been lying about? Patricia's apartment in Chicago became my war room. She took one look at me when I arrived, still in the same clothes from the airport, eyes swollen from crying on the plane, and handed me a glass of wine and a box of tissues. Then she sat me down at her dining table and said something I'll never forget. Crying comes later. Right now, we hunt. She made calls. Within 6 hours, we had hired a private investigator named Marcus Webb. He was this former cop with gray hair and tired eyes who had seen every kind of betrayal humans are capable of. He looked at my airport video, nodded once, and told me he'd have preliminary information within 48 hours. I spent those 2 days in a fog. I couldn't sleep. I kept checking Ryan's location on my phone. He had no idea I could still see where he was. He went to work. He went to the gym. He came home to our home every night like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just destroyed everything. He texted me constantly, asking how the conference was going, saying he missed me, sending heart emojis. Each message made me want to throw up. When Marcus came back with his report, Patricia and I sat down together to read it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. The woman's name was Claire Donovan, interior designer from Seattle. They met at an architecture conference in Portland 2 years ago. 2 years. I had to read that line 3 times before it sank in. This wasn't some recent mistake or moment of weakness. This had been going on for half of our marriage. Marcus had found hotel reservations, plane tickets, text message records that he'd somehow pulled through legal channels I didn't fully understand. There were hundreds of messages between them. In them, Ryan said he was unhappy, that I was obsessed with work, that I was controlling, that he was just waiting for the right moment to leave me. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Was I really that terrible? Had I been so blind to his unhappiness? Patricia grabbed my hand and told me not to believe his lies. That cheaters always rewrite history to justify their betrayal. But the words still hurt. Then Marcus showed us the financial records, and everything got so much worse. Ryan had opened a secret bank account 18 months ago. I never knew it existed, and he'd been transferring money into it. Our money, from our joint account, a little bit at a time. 500 here, 1,000 there. Small enough amounts that I never noticed them missing. The total was almost $95,000. I couldn't breathe. That money was supposed to be for our future, for the dream house we were saving to buy in Cherry Creek, for the family we talked about starting. He'd been stealing it, stealing from me, from us, to fund his secret life with her. Patricia kept reading, and her face went pale. There was more. Ryan had purchased an engagement ring 3 months ago, $15,000, for Claire. He was going to ask her to marry him. He was planning to divorce me and propose to her, probably had the whole thing mapped out. He'd take half of everything in the divorce, plus all that stolen money, and start fresh with his new love while I was left with nothing but the wreckage of what I thought was my life. I ran to Patricia's bathroom and threw up. When I came back, my sister was on the phone with someone, taking notes furiously. When she hung up, she looked at me with this fierce expression. "We're going to bury him," she said, "but we have to be strategic, to be smarter than he is. And most importantly, he cannot know that we know. Not yet." So, we made a plan. Patricia filed paperwork to freeze all our joint accounts. We changed the locks on the house, which was solely in my name because I'd made the down payment. We gathered every piece of evidence Marcus could find: text messages, bank statements, credit card receipts from hotels and restaurants in cities where Claire happened to be. And then, on the fourth day, Patricia looked at me and asked if I was ready. "Ready for what?" I asked. "To go home and confront your lying husband we never thought you'd find." I flew back to Denver that afternoon. The whole flight, I practiced what I was going to say in my head. How I was going to look at him. How I was going to keep my voice steady when every cell in my body wanted to scream. Patricia had coached me. Don't show all your cards at once. Watch his reaction. See how deep he'll dig his own grave before you bury him. When I walked through the front door, my newly rekeyed front door that Ryan didn't know had been changed yet, he was sitting on the couch watching a basketball game. He jumped up the second he saw me, a huge smile spreading across his face like he was genuinely happy to see me. The performance was almost impressive. He wrapped me in a hug and told me how much he'd missed me, asked about Boston, said the house felt empty without me. Every word was poison wrapped in, and I had to force myself not to pull away in disgust. I played along, smiled, told him the conference was fine but boring, said I was exhausted from all the travel. The lies came easier than I expected, maybe because I'd had such a good teacher. We ordered takeout, Thai food from our usual place. We sat at the kitchen table making small talk about his work projects and my presentations. He asked if I was okay because I seemed quiet. I told him I was just tired. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, looking at me with those eyes that used to make me melt. I wanted to grab that hand and break every finger, but instead, I squeezed back and smiled. Because I needed to see something. I needed to watch him lie to my face one more time so I could stop doubting myself. So I could stop wondering if maybe I was overreacting or if there was some explanation I hadn't considered. After dinner, I casually mentioned that my phone had been acting weird and asked if I could use his to check something. It was a test. Patricia said if he had nothing to hide, he'd hand it over without hesitation. His whole body tensed, just for a second. But I saw it. Then he laughed, this forced, uncomfortable laugh, and said his phone was almost dead and charging in the bedroom, that I should just use my laptop instead. Any moment of panic told me everything. He had messages on that phone he didn't want me to see. Probably texts from Claire. Probably evidence of all his lies. I nodded and said, "Okay, no big deal." Watched him visibly relax. Watched him think he'd dodged a bullet. Later that night, I fell asleep next to me like nothing was wrong. Like he hadn't just spent the evening lying through to the woman he'd promised to love and honor. I lay there in the dark, listening, and felt absolutely nothing. The love I'd had was just gone, replaced by this cold, clear. I waited until I was sure he was deep asleep, then carefully slid out of bed. My heart was pounding as I tiptoed to the bedroom where his phone was charging. I knew his passcode, his birthday, because he wasn't even creative enough to hide that. The phone unlocked, and there they were. Messages with Claire from just hours. While I was on the plane coming home she'd sent him a photo of herself in lingerie with a message about how she couldn't wait to see him next week. He'd replied with heart emojis and told her he was counting down the days. That he loved her, that soon they'd be together for good, and he wouldn't have to pretend anymore. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through weeks of messages. Months, actually. They talked about me like I was an obstacle. She called me the wife, like I wasn't even a real person. He complained about having to come home to me. Joked about how clueless I was. There were also messages about money. Claire asking if he'd managed to transfer more this month. Ryan assuring her that the Seattle House Fund was growing and that soon they'd have enough for a down payment on their dream home. Their future together. He was planning an entire life with her using money he'd stolen from me. I took screenshots of everything, sent them to my own phone, and then deleted the sent messages so he wouldn't know. I wasn't sad anymore. I was something colder. Something more. I climbed back into bed next to my husband, the stranger who'd been sleeping beside me for years. and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. The next morning, Ryan kissed me goodbye before heading to work, told me he loved me, reminded me we had dinner plans with his parents that weekend. I smiled and kissed him back, told him I loved him too, watched him walk out the door to his car, and then I called Patricia. "It's time," I said. "I'm ready to end this." She asked me if I was absolutely sure, if I was prepared for what came next. Because once we started, there was no going back. I looked around at the house I'd worked so hard to build, at the life I'd believed was real, at the framed wedding photo on the mantle showing two people who didn't exist anymore. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I told her. "Then let's destroy him," Patricia said. Patricia arrived in Denver the next day with a briefcase full of documents and a lawyer's ruthless precision. We sat in my living room, the living room that Ryan had no idea he was about to lose access, and she laid out our next steps like a general planning a military strike. But first, she said, we needed to understand the full picture, because the why behind a betrayal this calculated often reveals even more ugly truths. Marcus had continued digging, and what he'd found made my blood run cold. Ryan's architecture firm had been struggling for the past year, badly. He'd lost 2 major clients and had been demoted from senior architect to junior project. His income had dropped by almost 40%. But he'd never instead, he'd been taking money from our joint account to cover the gap and maintain his lifestyle. The expensive gym membership, the designer clothes, the fancy dinners he claimed were client meetings. But there was more. Claire wasn't just his mistress, she was his business plan. Through her interior design connections in Seattle, she'd promised to introduce Ryan to wealthy clients looking for architectural services. She'd dangled the possibility of him opening his own firm in Seattle with her help. She had family money. Her father owned a successful real estate development company, and she'd apparently suggested that her dad might invest in Ryan's new venture. That's when everything clicked into place. Ryan hadn't just fallen in love with another woman. He'd made a calculated decision that I was a sinking ship and Claire was his lifeboat to a better future. I was his past. She was his upgrade. Patricia showed me emails Marcus had recovered. In one of them, Ryan told Claire that divorcing me would be tricky because I made more money than him, and the house was in my name. She'd responded that she'd talked to her lawyer friend, and that in Colorado, he might be entitled to alimony since his income had decreased during the marriage. They'd actually strategized how to take me for everything they could. I sat there reading these emails, and something inside me just broke. Not in a sad way, in a liberating way, because every ounce of guilt, every moment I'd wondered if maybe I really had been a bad wife, if maybe I really had driven him evaporate. This wasn't about me being controlling or obsessed with work. This was about Ryan being a coward who saw people as assets to be traded up. Marcus had one more piece of info. He'd found text messages between Ryan and his college buddy from 3 months ago. Ryan had actually bragged about his plan, said he was going to wait until after our 4th anniversary to file for divorce, because Colorado law meant he'd have a better shot at getting spousal support. He was literally counting down the days until he could legally squeeze as much money out of me as possible. The level of calculation was breathtaking. This wasn't a man who'd made a mistake. This was a man who'd been systematically planning my financial destruction while sleeping next to me every night. Patricia looked at me across the coffee table and asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Do you still love him?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. Answer surprise. No, I don't even know if I ever really loved him, just loved who I thought he was. Real Ryan? The one in these emails and bank statements and text messages? I don't know that person at all. And I definitely don't love him. Good, Patricia said, because what we're about to do requires you to be absolutely certain. This isn't just about getting your money back. This is about making sure he can never do this to anyone else. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside was a draft of divorce papers that would make Ryan's life a living hell. We were going to sue him not just for divorce, but for fraud and theft. We were going to demand every penny of that stolen money back with interest. We were going to make sure every single person in his professional network knew exactly what kind of man he was. But, Patricia said, we have one more thing we need to do first. We need to get him on record lying. We need him to perjure himself so thoroughly that no judge will have any sympathy for him. How do we do that? I asked. Make him think he's won, she said with a smile that would have scared me if we weren't on the same side. We make him think you're the weak, clueless wife he's always believed you were. And then we watch him hang himself with his own rope. I spent the next 3 days being the oblivious wife. I cooked Ryan's favorite meals. I asked about his day. I talked about our finally starting to look at houses, maybe planning that trip to Italy we'd always discussed. I watched him lie to my face with increasing confidence, thinking I was too stupid to see through him. And every night, Marcus and Patricia and I gathered the final pieces of evidence we'd need to bury him in court. On the third night, Ryan came home and told me he needed to go to Seattle for a work conference next week. Would I mind if he went alone? It was just boring architecture stuff. I smiled and said of course I didn't mind, that I trusted him completely. The look of relief on his face made me sick, because I knew exactly what that Seattle trip really was. Claire had texted him that morning. Yes, I was still monitoring his phone, telling him her father wanted to meet him, that this could be the beginning of their new life together. Ryan was going to Seattle to essentially audition for his new life while still legally married to me. And Patricia, Marcus, and I were going to make sure that trip became the biggest mistake of his miserable life. While Ryan was busy planning his Seattle escape, something unexpected happened that changed everything. I got a call at work from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice asked if I was Celeste Harmon. My heart started racing. Had she somehow found out I knew? But it wasn't Claire. It was Ryan's mother, Diane. She asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us. There was something she needed to tell me. It couldn't wait. The urgency in her voice made my stomach drop. I almost said no. I didn't need Ryan's family getting involved and complicating things, but something told me to hear her out. We met at a Starbucks halfway between our houses. Diane looked older than the last time more tired. She ordered a coffee, sat down across from me, and said 5 words that nearly knocked me out of my chair. I know about the affair. I must have looked shocked, because she reached across the table and grabbed my hand. She told me she'd known for months. She'd seen charges on Ryan's credit card, the one that was still linked to a family account from years ago that she monitored. Hotel rooms in Seattle, expensive jewelry that I'd never received, plane tickets for 2. She'd confronted Ryan about it privately, and he'd admitted everything, told her he was in love with someone else, that he was going to leave me, and then he'd begged her not to say anything because he needed to time it right for financial reasons. Diane's voice cracked when she said that last part. She told me she'd been wrestling with her conscience for months. She'd raised Ryan better than this. She was ashamed of what her son had become, but he was still her son, and the loyalty had kept her silent. Until last week, when Ryan had called her asking if she could loan him $20,000. When she asked why, he'd said it was for a business investment opportunity in Seattle. He'd be able to pay her back within a year once things took off. That's when Diane realized Ryan wasn't just leaving me. He was planning to financially drain everyone around him, including his own mother, to fund his new life. She looked at me in my eyes and said she was so sorry, that she should have told me sooner, that she'd been a coward. And then she asked what she could do to help make this right. I sat there stunned. I'd expected Ryan's family to close ranks around him when everything came out, to defend their son no matter what. But here was his own mother, offering to testify against him if needed. Patricia nearly cried when Diane's testimony would be devastating in court. A mother willing to expose her own son's lies? No judge would question that credibility. But Diane gave us something even more valuable than testimony. She gave us access to Ryan's childhood, where he still kept boxes of old financial documents and personal files in the basement. Things he'd never bothered to move out because he trusted his parents completely. With Diane's permission, Marcus went through those boxes. And what he found was a pattern that made my skin crawl. I wasn't Ryan's first victim. There was evidence of a relationship before me, a woman named Jennifer that Ryan had dated for 3 years in his mid-20s. Marcus found old credit card statements showing the same pattern. Mysterious charges, hotel rooms, expensive gifts around the same time Jennifer's name stopped appearing in Ryan's social media. Diane confirmed it when I asked. Ryan had cheated on Jennifer with a woman he'd met at work. Jennifer had found out and left, but there'd never been any legal consequences because they weren't married and hadn't combined finances. I'd been so sure that I was the problem, that if I'd just been different somehow, Ryan wouldn't have strayed. But seeing this pattern, seeing that he'd done this before, made me realize that this was who Ryan was. This was what he did. I was just the first one he'd made the mistake of marrying. Diane helped us in another crucial way. She confirmed that Ryan had no idea I knew about any of this. She'd talked to him just 2 days ago, and he was still playing the devoted husband, still talking about our future together, still lying with every breath. She also told me something that Patricia immediately recognized as legal gold. Ryan had asked his father, a retired accountant, to help him hide assets before the divorce. His dad had refused and warned him it was illegal, but Ryan had laughed it off and said he'd figure it out himself. That conversation proved premeditation. Ryan wasn't just cheating and stealing. He was actively planning to commit fraud in the divorce proceedings. With Diane's help, we now had everything we needed. Bank records showing the stolen money, text messages proving the affair, and the planning. Witness testimony from his own mother about his intentions to hide assets, and a pattern of behavior showing this wasn't a one-time mistake, but a calculated habit. Patricia revised the divorce filing. It was now 15 pages of documentation and charges: fraud, theft, attempted asset concealment, adultery. The request for restitution had grown from $95,000 to include penalties and interest that would take Ryan years to pay off. And we had one more strategic move to make. Ryan's Seattle trip was in 4 days. Patricia discovered through Diane that Ryan had told his parents he might not come back from that trip alone, that he might finally ask me for a divorce while he was there and stay in Seattle to start fresh. He was planning to ambush, to leave me blindsided and unprepared while he had Claire and her father's resources backing him up. Patricia smiled when she heard this. She said, "Let him go to Seattle. Let him think he's won. Let him relax into his new life for exactly 48 hours. And then we'll serve him with divorce papers and a lawsuit in front of Claire and her entire family, showing them exactly what kind of man they're welcoming into their lives." I looked at Diane, who nodded firmly. She'd already agreed to fly to Seattle with Patricia to be there when it happened, to stand with me instead of her son. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the only way to love someone is to let them face the consequence." 4 days. Ryan had 4 days left of thinking he'd gotten away with everything, and I was going to make sure he savored every single second. The night before Ryan's Seattle trip, I did something that surprised. I made his favorite dinner, slow-cooked pot roast with roasted vegetables and homemade rolls. I set the table with candles. I wore the blue dress he'd once said made my eyes look incredible. I wanted to give him one last perfect evening before his entire world collapsed. Patricia thought I was crazy when I told her, but I needed this. I needed to look at final time as his wife, knowing everything I knew, and see if I felt anything at all, any hesitation, any doubt about what we were about to do. Ryan came home, and his whole face lit up when he saw the setup. He kept saying how lucky he was to have me, how much he was going to miss me during his conference, how he couldn't wait to get back home to me. Every word was a lie, and we both knew it. Except he thought I didn't. We ate dinner and talked about nothing important. He told me about a project at work, probably fictional. I told him about a difficult client meeting, completely true. We drank wine, we laughed at some stupid joke. To anyone watching through the window, we looked like a happy couple enjoying a quiet evening together. But I kept thinking about Claire, about how she was probably packing her bags right now, getting ready to show Ryan off to her father, about how she thought she was stealing another woman's husband, when really she was just inheriting someone else's problem. After dinner, Ryan pulled me close and kissed me, told me he loved me, and I kissed him back and said I loved him too, because in a twisted way, I needed him to remember this moment, this last perfect lie where he thought he'd won. He left for the airport early the next morning. I drove him, insisted on it actually, even though he said he could just park there. I wanted to see him walk through those same airport doors where I'd watched him kiss Claire. There was a poetry to it that felt right. Before he got out of the car, he kissed me goodbye, told me he'd call me when he landed, that this conference was really important for his career, and he was grateful I was so supportive. I smiled and told him I knew it was going to be a trip that changed everything. He had no idea how right I was. I watched him disappear into the terminal with his carry-on bag and his secrets, and then I drove straight to Patricia's hotel room. She'd flown in the night before with Marcus, and Diane had arrived that morning. We were all flying to Seattle on a flight that left 2 hours after Ryan's. The plane ride felt surreal. Patricia was reviewing documents. Marcus was confirming details with his contacts in Seattle. Diane sat quietly next to me, holding my hand. She kept apologizing, and I kept telling her she had nothing to apologize for. She wasn't the one who'd betrayed me. We landed in Seattle around 6 p.m. Ryan had texted me from his hotel, the Four Seasons downtown, which I knew from Claire's messages was where He said the conference was boring, but productive, that he missed me already. Heart emoji, kiss emoji. I didn't respond right away. I wanted him to wonder just a little bit. Marcus had tracked Ryan and Claire's movements through the day. They'd had lunch at an expensive seafood restaurant on the waterfront, held hands walking through Pike Place Market. Ryan had bought her flowers from one of the vendors. Roses, probably, since he wasn't very creative. They'd gone back to the hotel around 4 and hadn't left. Tomorrow was the big day. dinner with Claire's father at his house on Mercer Island, the pitch meeting where Ryan would try to sell himself as a respectable businessman, and Claire's future husband, the moment he'd been planning and stealing and lying for. Patricia had coordinated everything with scary efficiency. We had a process server ready. We had copies of all documents prepared. We even had Marcus ready to document everything with photos and video, not for social media or revenge, but for legal evidence in case Ryan tried to claim the service was somehow improper. That night in my hotel room, I barely slept. I kept running through scenarios in my head. Ryan somehow talked his way out of it. What if Claire's family didn't care? What if this whole plan backfired? But then I remembered that video from the airport. The $95,000. The text messages calling me controlling and obsessed with work. The secret bank account. The engagement ring he'd bought for another woman with money he'd stolen from me. And I remembered Diane's words. Sometimes the only way to love someone is to let them face the consequences of who they've chosen to become. Ryan had made his choices. Every single day for 2 years, he'd chosen to lie to me, to steal from me, to build a future with someone else while pretending to love me. Tomorrow, he'd finally face what those choices cost. Patricia knocked on my door around 11 p.m. She asked me one last time if I was ready, if I was absolutely certain I wanted to do this in front of Claire and her family rather than privately. I thought about that blonde woman running into Ryan's arms at the airport, about how she'd laughed when he spun her around, about how they'd planned my destruction together like it was some kind of romantic adventure. Yeah, I told Patricia. I'm ready. Let them both see exactly what they've done. Let Claire's family see exactly who she's bringing into their lives. No more secrets. No more hiding. Tomorrow morning, we'd drive to Mercer Island. We'd wait for Ryan to arrive at Claire's father's house, confident and charming and ready to start his new life. And then we'd walk up to that door and hand him papers that would end everything he'd been. I finally fell asleep around 2 a.m. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't have nightmares. I just dreamed about freedom. The next evening, we drove across the floating bridge to Mercer Island in 2 rental cars. Patricia, Marcus, and the process server in one, Diane and me in the other. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip my knees to keep them still. Claire's father lived in one of those massive waterfront estates that probably cost more than I'd earn in my entire lifetime. The kind with a private dock and perfectly manicured hedges and a circular driveway that screamed old money. We parked down the street and watched. Marcus had confirmed through his contacts that Ryan had arrived 20 minutes earlier. He'd shown up in an Uber, probably didn't want to risk Claire seeing our car, wearing his best suit and carrying a portfolio of his work to impress her father. Through the large front windows, we could see people moving around inside, laughing, drinking wine. Ryan's silhouette was unmistakable. He was gesturing animatedly, probably telling some charming story, playing the role of the successful architect who'd be such a wonderful addition to their family. My stomach was in knots. Part of me, a small, terrified part, wanted to call this whole thing off, to just file the papers quietly through the court and never have to see his face again. But I knew that would be taking the easy way out, and Ryan had never made anything easy for me. Why should I make this easy for him? Patricia looked back at me from the front. Last chance to change your mind, she said quietly. We can still do this another way. I watched Ryan through that window, watched him laugh and smile and charm these people who had no idea what he really was, what he'd done to get to this moment. No, I said, he needs to see me. He needs to know I wasn't the weak, clueless wife he thought I was. Let's go. We walked up to that enormous front door as a group, the process server in front, holding the legal documents, Patricia and Marcus flanking him, Diane and me right behind. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought everyone could hear it. The process server rang the doorbell. Through the frosted glass, I saw someone approaching. The door opened, and an older man in an expensive sweater appeared. Claire's father, I assumed. He looked confused at the group of strangers on his doorstep. The process server spoke first, very professionally. I'm looking for Ryan Harmon. Is he present at this residence? The man's confusion Yes, he's here. Is there a problem? That's when I stepped forward. My voice was steadier than I expected. I'm his wife, and yes, there's a problem. The man's face went pale. He turned and called inside. Ryan, there are some people here to see. I heard footsteps. Then Ryan appeared in the doorway, wineglass in hand, that charming smile still on his face. The smile died the second he saw me. All the color drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. In a way, I guess he had. The ghost of the woman he thought he'd left behind in Denver. Celeste? The process server stepped forward and Ryan Harmon, you've been served with divorce proceedings and a civil lawsuit for fraud and theft. You're legally required to respond within 30 days. Ryan's hands were shaking as he took the documents. He started flipping through them, his face getting paler with each page. Behind him, I could see Claire emerging from another room, her smile faltering as she registered the scene at the door. What is this? Ryan's voice came out as barely a whisper. This is some kind of mistake. Celeste, we can talk about this. Whatever you think is happening, I know about Claire, I said, loud enough for everyone inside to hear. I know about the $95,000 you stole from our joint account. I know about the secret bank account. I know about the engagement ring you bought with my money. I know about every hotel room, every lie, every single plan you made to destroy my life while smiling to my face. Claire had made her way to the door now. She looked between Ryan and me, realization dawning on her face. The wife, she said quietly. You're the wife. I am, I said, looking at her directly. Or I was. Though I don't think he ever mentioned that he was still very much married when he started sleeping with you 2 years ago. Or that the money he's been using to fly back and he stole it from me. That's not... Ryan started, but Patricia cut him off. Don't, she said sharply. Everything in those documents is backed up by bank records, text messages, emails, and testimony from multiple witnesses, including your own mother. Ryan's head snapped toward Diane, who had stepped forward. His face went from pale to red. Mom, you're helping her? Diane's voice was steady but sad. I'm helping the truth come out. What you did was wrong, Ryan, morally and legally. I raised you better than this. Claire's father was reading over Ryan's shoulder now, his expression getting darker with each page. He looked at Ryan with disgust. You're married, you stole from your wife, and you came into my home pretending to be someone worth knowing? Ryan was spiraling now, his eyes darting between all of us like a trapped... Can explain. Celeste, you don't understand. I was going to pay it all back. This was just... It was theft, Marcus said calmly. It's fraud. And it was premeditated, which makes it worse in the eyes of the law. Claire had gone completely silent, staring at Ryan like she was seeing him for the first time. All the color had drained from her face. She took a step back. You told me you were already divorced, she said quietly. You told me the separation was her idea. You told me... I told you what you wanted to hear. Ryan snapped, his mask finally cracking. His desperation was showing. Just like I told her what she wanted to hear. That's what you do when you're trying to move forward in life. The honesty of that statement hung in the air like poison. This was the real Ryan, not the charming architect or the devoted husband or the romantic boyfriend, just a man who saw people as obstacles or opportunities and said whatever he needed to say to get what he wanted. Claire's father spoke, his voice cold as ice. Get out of my house. Now. But Mr. Donovan, I can explain. Now, the man repeated. Before I call the police and have you removed. And Claire, we'll be having a very serious conversation about your judgment after this. Claire looked devastated, but she didn't defend Ryan. She just stood there with tears running down her face as her father physically stepped between her and Ryan. Ryan looked at me one last time. There was no charm left, no smile, just rage and panic. You're going to regret this, he hissed. You think you're so smart, but you're going to... Patricia stepped forward. I'd stop talking if I were you. Anything you say right now could be used against you in court, and you're already in enough trouble. Ryan grabbed his jacket from somewhere inside and pushed past us onto the front steps. He kept muttering to himself, shaking his head, looking back at the house like he couldn't believe this was happening. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, but mostly I just felt tired and ready for this chapter of my life to be over. As Ryan stumbled toward the street to call an Uber, I turned to Claire's father. I'm sorry for disrupting. I just needed him to face the truth. And I needed you to know who he really was before your family got hurt the way mine. The man's expression softened slightly. He nodded. You did the right thing. I'm sorry for what you've been through. We walked back to our cars. Behind us, I could hear raised voices from inside the house. Claire crying, her father's angry tone, the sound of Ryan's carefully constructed new life falling apart in real time. Patricia put her arm around me. How do you feel? I thought about it. Free, I finally said, 6 months after that night in Seattle, I sat in a courtroom in Denver and watched a judge deliver the final verdict. Ryan was ordered to repay every cent of the $95,000 he'd stolen, plus 8% annual interest. He had to cover all my legal fees, which had reached almost $40,000. He lost any claim to the house, to my retirement accounts, to anything we'd built together. The judge had looked at the evidence, the bank records, the text messages, Diane's testimony, the video from the airport, and his face had shown nothing but contempt. Ryan's lawyer had tried to argue that he deserved spousal support since his income had decreased during the marriage. Patricia had calmly presented evidence that his income decrease was due to his own poor performance and that he'd been secretly funneling money to support an extramarital affair. The judge denied the request immediately. When it was over, Ryan looked like a shell of the man I'd married. Thinner, grayer, defeated. He didn't even look at me as he left the courtroom. His life had imploded in every possible way. Claire had blocked him on everything the night we'd shown up in Seattle. Apparently her father had made some calls, and word spread quickly in the Seattle design and architecture community about what Ryan had done. No one wanted to work with a man who'd stolen from his own wife to fund an affair. Back in Denver, his professional reputation was destroyed. His firm had quietly let him go after the lawsuit became public. He'd found work at a small suburban office doing basic residential designs, making a fraction of what he used to earn. Most of his paycheck went straight to paying off his debt to me. Diane called me occasionally to check on me. She was heartbroken about her son, but maintained that he'd needed to face consequences. The last time we spoke, she mentioned that Ryan had moved into a studio apartment near Aurora and drove a 15-year-old Honda because his credit was ruined. I should have felt satisfied hearing that. Maybe I did. A little. But mostly, I just felt Ryan had become irrelevant to my life. My life, meanwhile, had become something I barely recognized in the best possible way. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I got promoted again, director of regional operations covering 5 western states, and with a significant raise and the freedom to build my team however I wanted. Turned out that standing up for myself in my personal life had made me more confident in my professional life, too. I bought a penthouse in Lodo with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains. It was entirely mine. My name on the deed, my furniture, my choices. I'd never lived alone before, went from my parents' house to college dorms to living with Ryan, and I'd been nervous about it. But I loved it. Loved the silence, loved the freedom to do whatever I wanted whenever I wanted. Loved not having to wonder if someone was lying. I started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand how I'd missed so many signs, how I'd let myself believe Ryan's lies for so long. My therapist helped me see that I'd wanted to believe because I'd invested so much in our relationship, that trusting people wasn't a weakness. Ryan's betrayal was his failure, not mine. About 8 months after the divorce, I went to a pharmaceutical industry conference in Chicago. Patricia had convinced me to go, saying I needed to get back out there and socially. I'd been resistant, still wasn't sure I wanted to date anyone, still wasn't sure I could trust my own judgment about people. That's where I met Nathan. He was a cardiologist giving a presentation on patient care coordination with pharmaceutical companies. Smart, articulate, and when we got to talking at the reception afterward, he was refreshingly honest about everything. He'd been divorced for 3 years, had a 10-year-old son named Mason who he shared custody with. He was open about his struggles with the divorce, about learning to co-parent, about rebuilding his life. There was no pretense with no performance, just a genuine, slightly awkward guy who made me laugh and didn't pretend. We exchanged numbers, started texting, had a few video calls. He lived in Denver too. What were the odds? And worked at the same hospital system where my company supplied medications. We'd probably been in the same building dozens of times without knowing it. Our first real date was coffee. Just coffee. Nathan suggested it, saying he wanted to take things slow because his son was his priority, and he didn't want to introduce anyone into Mason's life unless it was serious. I almost cried with someone who actually communicated, who set boundaries, who thought about consequences before making decisions. That was 4 months ago. We're still taking it slow. I've met Mason twice. Casual hangouts, nothing heavy. Nathan has been completely transparent about his finances, his custody arrangement, his family, even offered to have me meet his ex-wife if it would make me more comfortable, which was weird but also kind of sweet. Not saying Nathan is my happily ever after. I'm not even sure I believe in that concept anymore. But he's kind, he's honest, makes me feel like I can, which is more than I realized I needed. Last week, I ran into Ryan at a coffee shop near his office. It was the first time I'd seen him since the courtroom. He looked older, tired. He nodded at me awkward. I nodded back. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. As I walked back to my car with my coffee, I realized I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel betrayed. I just felt grateful. Grateful that I'd found out grateful for Patricia and Marcus. Grateful that I'd had the strength to fight back instead of just accepting what Ryan, that video from that she ended up saying. It showed me that sometimes the worst moments of your life are actually doorways to better ones. I have a life now that's a career I'm proud of, an apartment I love, a sister who showed me what real loyalty looks like, and maybe eventually a chance at love with someone who actually deserves. The truth is, I don't think about Ryan. He's become what he always should have been. A lesson, a reminder that I'm stronger than I ever knew I was. Sometimes people ask me if I regret marriage, if I wish I could go back and avoid all that, and honestly, no, because that pain taught me who I am. It taught me that I can survive betrayal, that I can fight for myself, that I deserve better. And now, I have better. Not because someone gave it to me, but because I built it myself. That airport moment, world fell apart. It was also the moment I started putting myself back together. Except this time, I built something that couldn't be broken by someone else's lies. I built a life that was finally, completely, authentically mine. So, that's my story. That's how an early return from a business trip and a bouquet of red roses at the wrong airport changed everything. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. It helped to tell it, to put it all out there, and own every part of it. I'd love to know where you're hearing this from. What city are you in right now? Drop a comment and let me know. There's something comforting about knowing this story reached people who maybe needed to hear that you can survive betrayal and come out stronger. And if you want to keep following these stories, the messy, real, sometimes painful, but ultimately hopeful stories about people rebuilding their lives, go ahead and subscribe, because we all deserve to know we're not alone in this. Thanks for being here with me through all of this. Really, it means more than you